They are disturbed because their strategy has collapsed in on itself, leaving them uncertain of the path forward. You see, when a person plays with the harmony of others, when they attempt to bend trust, when they build their world on shifting sands, they often fail to see the true price. Not the price you pay, the price they pay to themselves. Because any action founded on illusion will eventually decay from within. This may not be apparent immediately. It can even appear they are succeeding for a season, but the structure always gives way. What remains is a profound unease and the heavy awareness that their mask has lost its purpose. They profoundly misjudged you. This is the truth that agitates them. They perceived your stillness as a form of surrender. They saw your dedication and believed it was blindness. Your compassion was mistaken for a lack of strength. And so, they wove their complex designs, believing they could direct the flow of events. What they never foresaw was that you would simply walk another path. That you would stop nourishing their discontent. That you would align with serenity over turmoil, with authenticity over performance, with wholeness over the fractured comfort of their world. Your quiet evolution was something they could not predict because it exposed the hollowness of their foundation. And now, their careful arrangement has not just failed, it has dissolved. Beings like that are often unsettled by accountability. They resist looking at their own reflection. Their aim is for others to carry the weight of their own inner discord. This is why they seek to influence and control, because they cannot bear the quiet truth of their own emptiness. So, as you found your center, as you reclaimed your inner landscape, they did not find peace. They felt seen. In that clarity, a deep disturbance arises because the one outcome they depended on, you remaining fractured, did not come to pass. You found your way back to wholeness, and that wholeness for them feels like a loss. The disquiet they carry is not about you. It is about the unease they will not face. It is about the dissolution of the influence they once held. It is the realization that their methods have lost their power. To a soul dependent on illusion, that is a profoundly unsettling reality. You have become a mirror to their own instability, not because you wish them harm, but because you simply ceased allowing harm to be your reality. That is what truly moves them, the knowledge that you did not join their dance, the understanding that you chose truth over conflict, the fact that you departed without fanfare, without a final battle, just the clean, resonant silence of someone whose journey has moved on. And they are left with the natural outcome of their own intentions, the echo of their own disharmony. You see, those who seek to direct others often think in the short term. They pursue fleeting advantages, forgetting that life is a long and unfolding path. They trade lasting tranquility for a momentary sense of control. But peace is never found through dominance. It arises from alignment with truth. This is why they have none. They are agitated, restless, and disturbed. Not because you wounded them, but because they could not disrupt your spirit. There is a profound power in stepping away from a game that was never aligned with your spirit. This choice unsettles the very structure they worked to uphold. It invites them to confront the understanding that real strength is not found in controlling others. It is found in self-respect. And this is what you now embody. Your composure, your refusal to engage in conflict, your decision to return to your center. This presence is a threat to their illusion. It is the most powerful statement you could ever make, because your silence possesses a great weight, and for them, it is a heavy burden to bear. Let them feel their agitation. Allow them their unease. That disturbance is merely fear wearing a different mask. It's the fear of being truly seen for who they are. It's the fear of becoming irrelevant now that your path has diverged. It's the fear that their influence will no longer find purchase. And that fear, it is a chamber of their own making. You have no need to enter it. You have nothing to demonstrate. You have already found your victory. Not by playing their game with more skill, but by realizing it was not your game to play at all. That is true strength. That is genuine liberation. That is your transformation. They believed the journey was about power. but you have shown them it is about one's inner state. And in this, they have failed. Not because you defeated them, but because they compromised their own spirit in an attempt to outmaneuver the truth. Now they must reside with that choice. You, however, you are free. Not just from them, but from the part of yourself that once accepted that reality. And that freedom, that growth, is something they may never grasp. For it requires a humility they did not cultivate. Let them be agitated. Let them follow their spiraling path. You have more meaningful things to build. They perceived your kindness as a vulnerability, and that was their first and most significant misjudgment. They believed your capacity for compassion was an absence of strength, not its highest expression. They witnessed your patience and thought it was an inability to act. Your loyalty was seen as a lack of awareness. But this is the fundamental error of those who see the world this way. They can only measure others with their own fractured understanding. They assume everyone is engaged in the same pursuit, a pursuit of control, of masks, of small, self-serving victories. So when they meet a spirit that is authentic, one who offers connection without strategy, they are at a loss. Rather than cherishing it, they attempt to use it. They imagined you were predictable. They thought they could diminish you, slowly and carefully, keeping you tethered like a vessel subject to their will. You offered understanding when they had not earned it. You gave them further opportunities when they had no commitment to change. And through their distorted lens, your grace was seen as evidence that you were lesser, as though setting boundaries was the only mark of strength, and offering mercy was a mark of foolishness. This is what occurs when one tries to understand a deep river through the shallow lens of power. But what they did not see, what they could not comprehend, is that kindness is not weakness. It is a mindful choice. It is strength in gentle repose. It is the capacity to offer harmony when you could choose discord. For the longest time, you chose harmony, not from an avoidance of confrontation, but from a hope they might see the value in something true. You held a belief that if you demonstrated what loyalty looked like, what authenticity felt like, they would be inspired to meet you in that space. That is not weakness. That is a profound faith. That is the heart's offering, and it is a rare thing. So you remained longer than was wise. You explained truths they did not deserve to understand. You offered your light in places where no light was returned, and this was used to your detriment. They framed your virtues as liabilities. And in this act, they built a narrative for themselves where you were naive, where you could not stand on your own, where you lacked the spine to ever turn away. This story gave them a sense of control. It made their actions feel justified. But then came a moment they never anticipated, the moment you began to see with total clarity. The veil was lifted. The accumulation of their actions settled within you, and your heart, though bruised and weary, knew it had given enough. And you did not protest. You did not fight back. You did not lower yourself to their state of disharmony. You simply stopped being present for it. You stopped answering. You withdrew the access they once held over you. You chose your own well-being. And that, more than anything else, broke their illusion. Because the one thing a controlling spirit cannot handle is losing the person they believed they could always break. The one who gave even when it cost them. The one whose stillness came from love, not from fear. They thought the game could continue, but it only works if the other person stays on the board. You simply picked up your pieces and walked a new path, quietly and with dignity, without any need for a dramatic scene. Now they are furious. Not because you did anything wrong, but because you finally did something right for yourself. Because when you ceased meeting their chaos with your compassion, when you stopped allowing them to define your world, you took away their sense of control and let it dissolve. Now they are left with a truth they cannot reshape. You were never weak. You were simply kind. And they mistook that for something they could dominate. Let that settle within you. They are not unsettled because you failed them. They are unsettled because you have risen, because your inner strength illuminated their fragility, because your evolution highlighted their stagnation, because your silence speaks with more resonance than all of their noise. They are not just angry with you. They are angry with themselves, though they may never speak it. Deep down, they know they held something rare in their hands with you, and they chose to exploit it instead of honoring it. This is the great tragedy of those who live by illusion. They dismantle the very things that could have brought them peace. And by the time they see what they have lost, it is far too late. The kind soul has departed. The loyal one has grown. The silent one has found their true voice. Not for argument, not for pleading, but to walk away with a quiet certainty. And it is then they finally see your kindness was never a vulnerability. It was a gift they did not have the wisdom to receive, and one they will never be offered again. All they have now is the silence, the emptiness, the void created by someone they believed they could control forever. And no matter how loud their anger becomes, no matter how they try to retell the story to feel better, the truth will follow them. They played a game and it dissolved because, in trying to fracture someone they saw as weak, they revealed the true fragility within themselves. And you are not fractured. You are not bitter. You are transformed, stronger, wiser, and above all free. Your growth has illuminated their illusion, and for this reason, they cannot find peace in your presence. Understand that when you begin to rise, when you start the journey of healing and evolving, when you become more than the limited story they held for you, you challenge the very ground on which their identity stands, because their influence was only effective while you doubted yourself. Their sense of power was only present when you questioned your own value. For as long as you were within the fog of their narrative, they could feel a sense of control. They could believe that you needed them, that they held a superior position, that their distorted view was reality. But once you started to awaken, that entire structure began to weaken. They existed in a world where you were meant to stay small, where your true potential was clouded by doubt and misplaced devotion. A world they helped to maintain, where your inner knowing was chipped away over time. Not always through overt actions, but through quiet dismissals, by bending the truth, by withholding warmth, by rewriting the past. These were not simply unskillful behaviors. They were rooted in a deep need to maintain a position of advantage. Because if you ever saw yourself with clarity, if you ever reclaimed your inner strength, it would reveal how insubstantial their own was. And then it began to happen. You started to shift. Quietly, perhaps at first, you began to ask new questions. You started to create internal space. You stopped reacting in the old, predictable ways. You no longer felt the need to explain your path. You stopped trying to mend what they continually disturbed. You became still, observant, and grounded. This shift deeply unsettled them. The more grounded you became, the more their own footing felt unstable. They sensed the spell was breaking, and in that, a quiet panic grew. Growth does not only heal you, it shines a light on all that was misaligned. As you evolve, you carry truth with you, and truth is resonant. It does not need to shout. It simply is. Your quiet presence begins to contrast with their inner chaos. Your new boundaries highlight their lack of respect. Your elevated standards reveal their old methods. You did not even have to confront them directly. Your very existence as a person who refused to participate in the illusion any longer was the confrontation. And that is what agitates beings like that, being seen. For the first time, they were not the author of the story. They could not reframe your words or deflect your awareness. You had changed, you had grown, and growth makes it impossible to return to illusion. It is like awakening from a dream. Once you are conscious, you cannot pretend you are still asleep. They recognized that in you, and it was deeply unsettling. Worse still for them is that you didn't just grow in private. Others began to see it as well. Your energy was different. You carried a new light. The story they had painted of you, the weak one, the unstable one, was dissolving. In its place stood someone centered, composed, and clear. Their narrative no longer matched what the world was now witnessing. This contrast was hard for them to bear, as it forced them to face their own inner contradictions. They became defensive, even agitated. Suddenly you were acting differently, perhaps too distant, or too self-absorbed. But you were not being self-absorbed. You were simply finished being used. That distinction pierced their illusion like a ray of light. You no longer offered them access to your emotional landscape as before. No more storms for them to navigate. No more vulnerabilities for them to exploit. Your silence grew louder than anything you had previously said, and it left them standing in the light, in a world where they had once thrived on shadows. Here is the truth. They never held power over you. They only held the illusion of power, which was sustained by your own uncertainty. Once you became certain of who you are, that illusion dissolved. Without it, they were left with the truth of themselves. A truth that was stark and uncomfortable. Not because you tried to warn them, but because your light revealed the shadows of their own actions. And some people cannot bear to be seen in the light. It is easier to resent your transformation than to face their own betrayal. But you did not grow for them. You grew for peace. You grew because you were wary of living small to protect another's fragility. You grew because you were tired of carrying a silent burden while another played the victim. You grew because you understood that your life was not meant to be lived in a state of mere survival. In doing so, you broke the cycle. You became the one who stepped out of the illusion. In that act of self-respect, you became a challenge to them. Not because you were unkind, but because you refused to be controlled. They don't resent you for being untruthful. They resent you because you stopped believing their untruths. That is what they cannot reconcile. That is what truly haunts them. Not that you exposed them to the world, but that you exposed them to themselves. Now every time they witness your peace, your growth, your quiet confidence, it is a reminder of who they could have been if they had not chosen the path of control. It reminds them that they lost something true, something good, and that they lost it through their own actions. That is the beauty of your transformation. It did not just save you, it revealed them. Your silence is more resonant than their disturbance, and that is what they cannot understand. You see, when a person is accustomed to controlling the flow of a story, they rely on your reactions. They are nourished by your explanations, your sorrow, your frustration. As long as you engage, you are still participating. But when you become silent, not from a place of defeat, but from a place of clarity, they lose their hold. Not just their influence over you, but the illusion that they were more important than your own inner peace. And that silence becomes a clear mirror that they cannot turn away from. They wanted you to cry out. They hoped you would break, plead, or react with great force, because then they could say, "You see, they are unstable. They are not at peace. They are the source of the discord." This is how a controlling mind works. It generates a storm and then faults you for getting wet. It pushes and pulls until your path is unclear, and then blames you for losing your footing. But when you refuse to continue that dance, when you withdrew the investment of your emotional energy, you took away the very foundation on which they stood your engagement. This is what they never expected. That your strength would appear as stillness, that your greatest act of personal power would be to simply walk away, leaving no entry point for further disruption. They do not know how to relate to that kind of tranquility. They perceive silence as a void because they live in a world of constant noise. They are accustomed to drama, to conflict, to ceaseless motion. Your silence is not an absence of words. It is the end of their relevance to your journey. And that is an unbearable realization for a soul who has built their identity on being in control. They are agitated now because their influence has dissolved, because they can no longer reach you as they once did, because your detachment speaks more clearly than 1,000 arguments ever could. It conveys, without a single word, "You are not deserving of another explanation. You will not receive another piece of my spirit." And that, more than any debate, unsettles them. It removes their perceived superiority. It forces them to sit with the fact that they are no longer the center of your universe, that you have reclaimed your attention, your focus, your dignity. And they cannot distort that into something negative because there is nothing left for them to hold on to. Silence is confusing for those accustomed to causing harm without consequence. They anticipate a fight because a fight signifies you are still connected. But when you withdraw, when you no longer need to explain or justify or defend your path, it signals a deeper truth. They are no longer a factor, not to your peace, not to your journey, not to your future. That realization, more than any shouted word, is what truly disquiets them. It is not that you had nothing to say. You held oceans of hurt, chapters of betrayal, volumes of truths they were unwilling to hear. But you have learned that not every person is worthy of your voice. Some people only hear words to distort them. Some listen only to form a reply, not to understand. So you chose silence, not out of fear, but out of wisdom. Because when you have seen enough, felt enough, and lost enough of yourself, trying to explain what should be obvious, you realize that the most powerful action you can take is to say nothing at all and continue your walk. And the great irony is that your silence is now the loudest thing in their life. It echoes in the spaces where your presence once was. It follows them into the quiet moments when their own illusions fall away. They thought they would win by pushing you away, but now they are simply left with themselves, and your absence illuminates all that they tried to keep in shadow. They may tell themselves you are cold, that you have changed, that you were never truly devoted. But deep down, they know the truth. They were given chances. You did not simply vanish. You offered opportunity after opportunity, tried to mend what they kept breaking, and stayed long after your own spirit began to dim. Your silence was not abrupt. It was earned. It was the final, graceful act of a soul who had finally remembered their own worth. That realization that you are no longer willing to shrink yourself for someone who refused to grow is what follows them. Let them feel their agitation. Let them cast accusations into the void, seeking a response. That is no longer your burden. You do not have to defend your peace. You do not have to explain your silence. Those who understand, understand, and those who do not were never truly listening in the first place. What is important is that you are free. You no longer need to be heard to know your own truth. You have outgrown the need to prove anything to anyone who only ever saw your heart as a tool for their control. In a world consumed by noise, your silence is your sanctuary. And for those who once thrived on your turmoil, it is their mirror. Their anger is a shield for their shame, and it is a heavy burden to carry. On the surface, their expression might be one of frustration, of bitterness, or even of false righteousness. They may cast blame upon you, mock your path, or pretend that they are untouched. But far beneath that outer storm is an uncomfortable truth they desperately wish to conceal. They know precisely what they did, and they know it was misaligned with harmony. The anger is simply the story they tell themselves. It is the barrier they erect so they do not have to face the raw, humbling feeling of having dismantled something good, something that did not deserve to be broken. Shame is a powerful undercurrent. It does not rage and roar like anger. It whispers in the stillness. It follows a person into their own quiet moments. This is what they feel now, but they will not name it, because to acknowledge shame is to acknowledge fault. It means the performance must end. And those who seek to control, who live in deception, who tell falsehoods to themselves as often as they do to others, they do not know how to stand before their own shortcomings. The prospect terrifies them, so instead they look outward, they project, they find external causes for their internal state, because to look within would be to fracture their own illusion. You became a mirror for them. That is the true issue, not because you admonished them or sought to expose them, but because you walked away with your own integrity whole. You did not descend to their level of disharmony. You did not play the game of retribution. And that, more than anything, unsettled them. For a person filled with private guilt and self-reproach, witnessing someone they harmed rise with quiet dignity is nearly unbearable. It forces them to feel all they have tried to suppress. Your tranquility holds them to account more than any argument ever could. Each time they think of you, they are reminded of their own actions and what was lost. And that is the most difficult part for them. Not losing influence, not losing access, but losing your genuine respect. Even if they pretend not to care, it matters to them deeply. You were not just a person they wounded. You were a person who saw their potential, who offered them grace, who accepted them despite their inner turmoil. And the knowledge that they betrayed that trust, that they burned a bridge they lacked the wisdom to build, that shame cuts deeply. But they have no skill with which to process it, so they bury it beneath layers of anger, denial, and blame. They will paint you as the one who abandoned them, who changed, who was too sensitive or too difficult. All of this is done to avoid the heavy feeling of regret that rests just beneath the surface. But within, where the truth resides, far from the noise and defenses, they know you were good to them. They know you did not deserve their actions. And they know they cannot turn back time. There is a reason they are still thinking about you, still speaking of you, still attempting to rewrite the story. It is not because they have moved on. It is because they have not, and they cannot. What they lost was not insignificant. It was not casual. You were authentic. And now that you are gone, they must sit with the reality of who they are without your light to reflect upon. That is where the shame resides, in that empty space. They did not expect to feel this way. In their moments of action, in the playing of their game, they believed they were winning. They felt strong, but strength built upon illusion and pride eventually gives way to fragility. When you betray a soul who genuinely cared, you do not walk away untouched. You carry the mark of that choice. You carry the guilt, even if you refuse to name it. And with time, that hidden weight begins to erode the spirit. You may never hear them acknowledge it. They may never offer an apology or speak the truth. But do not mistake their outer silence for inner peace. There is a quiet war within them now, one of their own making, which they must face alone. Every time they see you living your truth, growing, healing, and becoming more than they ever thought possible, it stirs the shame in you, because you were supposed to remain broken. You were supposed to remain small. They thought by dimming your light, their own would appear brighter. But all they achieved was to blind themselves. Let them project, let them rage, let them wear their anger as armor. You do not have to respond. The truth requires no defense from you. In time, their mask will develop cracks. Rage fades. Anger is a fire that burns itself out. But shame endures. And when all the noise has settled, they will be left with the truth they cannot escape. They dismantled something beautiful, not by mistake, but by choice. The consequence of that choice will remain with them far longer than they ever anticipated. You, on the other hand, are free. You met the pain, faced the darkness, and chose to rise. You let go, not because it was unimportant, but because you knew your own well-being mattered more. That is what distinguishes your paths. You have owned your story. They are still running from theirs, and until they cease hiding behind the mask of anger, they will never know peace. Because deep down, it is not you they resent. They resent themselves for having lost you. Their disturbance is not power. It is not control. It is a fragile mask, a thin cover for something that has been growing within them. A profound sense of shame that has been festering in the quiet. And what is unsettling for them now is that the mask is beginning to feel heavy. No matter how loudly they speak, how much they deflect blame, how many others they try to sway, there is a quiet, piercing awareness inside them they can no longer silence. The awareness that they brought this upon themselves. You did not cause their undoing. You did not expose them or seek revenge. But your own growth, your silence, your refusal to return to the old ways, that did something far more profound in their eyes. It revealed that their perceived power was an illusion. It proved that your worth was never tied to their validation. Now they are in a state of unrest, not because you have wronged them, but precisely because you did not. You did not lower your own state to match theirs. You did not become bitter, you rose. And that kind of ascent forces them to see the stark contrast between the person they pretended to be and the person you have truly become. The more they witness you finding peace, healing with grace, and moving forward on your path without them, the more unbearable their own reflection becomes. They cannot stand the person they are without your presence to manipulate, without your heart to twist, without your compassion to draw upon. And more than anything, that is the root of their shame. It is not just in the act of having hurt you, but in the loss of the one person who still saw good in them when they could not find it in themselves. This is the truth they will never say aloud. You were their safe harbor. You were the one who met their damage with acceptance. You were the mirror that showed them potential, hope, and a path toward wholeness. And instead of choosing to grow with you, they chose to exploit that love. Because growth demands courage, vulnerability, and accountability, qualities they had not cultivated. So they turned against the very person who could have helped them transform. Now, long after you have released your hold, they remain bound to the chamber they built for themselves. Anger is their immediate response because shame feels like weakness to them. They were taught to dominate, not reflect, to blame, not to look within, to survive through control rather than through connection. So they create outer storms. But their rage is hollow. It has no firm ground because it is not born from truth. It is a defense, a loud noise to drown out the whisper that will not leave them. You lost something real, and you did it with your own hands. This is why they cannot stop thinking of you, why they observe you from a distance, why they try to rewrite the past. They are attempting to outrun their own shame by reinventing reality. But no matter what they say, the truth of what happened does not change. You were genuine. You were present. You were loyal. And they were careless with your spirit. They engaged in a game and lost a person they now realize they did not have the wisdom to deserve. And rather than humbling themselves, they lash out. But each time they do, the shame tightens its hold, because deep down they know you never fought them. You simply outgrew them. Here is the truth they cannot face. You did not need to ruin them. They are doing that to themselves. The longer they refuse to take ownership of their actions, the longer they must carry that unseen weight. And over time, that weight grows heavier. It isolates them. It hardens them. It taints every new interaction because they have not healed, they have not learned, and they have not changed. They are still caught in the same pattern, while you have stepped into a new landscape of your own being, one to which they will never again have access. Let that be sufficient for you. You do not need to explain your perspective, seek resolution, or await an apology. Sometimes, your own peace is the only resolution you will receive, and it is enough. Because while they remain trapped in a cycle of denial, you are free. You are no longer searching for their validation. And that freedom is its own form of quiet, enduring justice that echoes every time they remember how things could have been, if only they had made a different choice. So let them wear their anger like armor. You know what lies beneath it. You have seen the truth. You have lived it. And now you have risen from it. That is something they will have to live with long after the noise fades. Because while anger may be loud, shame never forgets.